Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about 3 TV shows because there was no new movie released this weekend besides Jaws 3D, which I did watch, which was pretty great actually. But I wanted to review some stuff on the channel that I haven't talked about yet, and that is 3 different TV shows. We're going to be talking about She-Hulk, House of the Dragon, and of course The Rings of Power, which just aired on Amazon today. And these are 3 shows that I've been really enjoying for very different reasons. So we're going to be talking about spoilers for all 3 of these. So if you want to, skip ahead to the different reviews that you want to hear about, whether it's Rings of Power or She-Hulk or of course House of the Dragon, there's going to be time codes down below so you can just skip all to wherever you want to go. So the first thing I want to talk about is of course She-Hulk, which is the brand new Marvel MCU show on Disney+. And this is a show that's, I watched a trailer, a few months ago and it was fine. I think there were some issues with the CGI, but I pushed that off on the side. I was just trying to deal with, what did the show look like? Did it look funny? Did it look good? And I thought it looked pretty okay. And when it finally debuted a couple weeks ago, I fell in love with this show for many different reasons. And they promised that this show was going to be this, procedural lawyer comedy show. And that is exactly what it is, plus more. It really is a show that's, really hits home with the comedy. And I think that this character that I hear about from the comics, I didn't read the comics, of course, but, from what I hear, her breaking the fourth wall, being this very entertaining character to either read on the page or to see on screen, and having a talent like Tatiana Maslany, which I think everybody can unanimously agree is easily the best part of this show. And of course, the writing for this character is the best part of this show. She is a revelation in this thing. And I think that is what really holds the show up above some of the other MCU shows, is that her performance and her comedy and the writing for this comedy in this show, especially the fourth wall breaking, is very funny. And this is where the MCU can really have some fun, where it can poke holes into, the recastings of Mark Ruffalo's Hulk, or, some of the other procedural aspects of it being a lawyer show. I loved in the 3rd episode when she said, oh, this is where the A and B plots converge, because throughout the entire episode, I was like, what is the point of this B storyline? It's like, it's not tying into anything. It just kind of felt awkward. And then she pointed it out, and it's like, okay, there goes all my flaws for this show. So it's very self-aware, and it very much knows what it is. And this could honestly be a dangerous thing, because you can have a bad show that's self-aware, that, tries to let that be the excuse of why, oh, you know what, all your flaws are actually not valid because I pointed it out. But the thing about this show is, it is a solid show. The writing is legitimately good, and those poking fun things are just a cherry on top. And so I think that is why, in large parts, this show does work. And I think the episodes being as short as they are, and how fast it kind of flies through some of these storylines, and how easy some things tend to be, is kind of a flaw. I didn't really have a problem with, her origins in the 1st episode. I thought that was actually pretty fun, a fun way of her and her banter between Bruce Banner, which that, relationship and that chemistry that those 2 actors had in that 1st episode was phenomenal. But once you move on to the Abomination stuff and, the actual lawyer stuff, I think that is where this type of pacing that this show has actually works really well. And of course, the comedy, like I said, it really works in this episode. I knew it really worked early on in the 1st episode, where I was already laughing about them talking about Captain America's virginity, and just throughout that episode, the comedy was really funny. And then that after credit scene was just, I was dying laughing. And then the 2nd episode and the 3rd episode kept that sort of energy with Jennifer Walters and with Tatiana Maslany with this performance. And like I said, without her, I think this show would fail a lot more often than it succeeds. And this is what I'll say about the discourse online about this show. And this could really be applied to anything that you're talking about on the internet, but specifically She-Hulk. And of course, this also applies to House of the Dragon, because there's a lot of discourse around that 1st episode. And then even Rings of Power, which I don't know the discourse yet, but I'm sure there's going to be something online. And that is, you can have valid criticisms for any of these shows. That's fine. You can have your opinion about that. But the thing is, it's called criticisms, and you can have your opinions on whatever, but if you are actually looking at it in, your own personal way, your own personal views, and you're looking at it and you're being actually critical of it and not just blatantly disrespectful, that is something that I can respect. So if you don't like She-Hulk for whatever reason, I'm curious to hear all your guys' thoughts if you are actually critical about it and you have some intelligent knowledge that you're applying to it with your own personal, stuff that you're bringing to the show. And that is the type of discourse I want to have in these conversations about these different shows. So again, comment down below what you thought of She-Hulk. I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts. And let's move on to the House of the Dragon, which, again, discourse on the internet about Game of Thrones. People hated that final season. I actually have a review out for it. I watched all of Game of Thrones in a month prior to, the release of the finale of that show, and I actually finished the second to last episode 20 minutes before the series finale aired live on TV. And so since I binged that show so fast, the ending didn't hit me as hard as some other people did with actually, super hating that show, but the finale definitely was not good. There's a lot of rush elements in that, and it just kind of deflated the entire series as a whole, because if you don't end well, it just kind of deflates it all. And so when you're getting a spin-off show, especially a prequel show that's taking place 200 years prior to those events, it can go one of two ways. It can go in its own direction. It can be very, very exciting and good, or it can have those same pitfalls that's, the previous thing that they worked on did. And this is luckily a great return to this world of Westeros. I loved these first two episodes. And I think of all the shows I'm talking about here today, this is actually my favorite of the three of them, because for one, the political intrigue in these first two episodes and the writing of the characters in these first two episodes were completely just perfect, in my opinion. Those are the parts of Game of Thrones that I actually missed from the earlier seasons, which was the dialogue and the, the chess playing of all these characters really, vying for the actual throne. The Iron Throne is something that is so sought after by all these different characters, and they're going all through their own backwards ways to get to it. And some of my favorite characters in this first episode was Rhys Ifans as Otto Hightower, and he was very much in the background of the first episode, but he's that type of character that, kind of slides into the background, kind of fades away, yet always interjects at the perfect moments to kind of get what he wants in very subtle ways. And I think in terms of writing for this and the political type of tension that is built between all the characters in this show, specifically with him, he's been the most successful with all this stuff, because when you have that absolutely heartbreaking scene with the queen and that birth and the tragic death of both of them, the queen and of course her son, it was a brutal sequence that is warranted for all of that, triggering from other audience members. I can very much see that, but for me, it was a very powerful moment that kind of fit into this world and kind of drew you into that first episode. And going to the second one of seeing, Otto not really caring, or he did care about the grieving for a second, but then he's like, okay, I need to make my move before other people like Corlys also makes the move to, kind of push the king towards marriage, and kind of suggesting to Alicent, like, go over and kind of console the king in a way, and eventually you're going to get exactly what we want, which is having the heir to the throne being in our family now. And that is when Game of Thrones was at its best, was when all these different characters surrounding the Iron Throne all trying to get their way onto that chair, trying to get their families in a higher position in this world, and trying to get as much power as they can, no matter how corrupt they become from that power. And I think that this show is very much setting up all these characters in an interesting way. I really love Rhaenyra as a new character. She is now the heir to the throne, Viserys' daughter, who was kind of ignored by him throughout all these years because he was trying to get a son, but he didn't realize who he had in front of him the entire time. And she was a great character because she is a very strong character. She knows how to lead in a very important ways, because that is how she grew up. She was, the cupbearer inside of this, council room, and she's hearing all the political things that are happening, and she's able to settle situations without violence. She's able to do all these things, yet she is a female character, and so in the world of Westeros, a woman cannot be on the throne, but she's really fighting for that. And of course you have Daemon and Corlys, who are also trying to get to the throne because they were kind of pushed off to the side by Viserys, because Viserys went with Alicent as his wife instead of, Corlys' daughter, who was, that whole thing is very uncomfortable. It's very meant to be uncomfortable, but still, he went from like a 12-year-old to a 15-year-old, so the lesser of two evils, essentially. But, to have this character really turned back by that, he had the opportunity to kind of have these two great families come together and, build an even stronger kingdom, and he agrees with Daemon in saying that, yes, this king, as, as great as he is in terms of trying to keep the peace, he is a very weak king, and he's going about it in very weak ways. And Daemon being a character that is just very, very intriguing, because he's a terrible person. He does a lot of terrible things in the show, but he has moments where you realize, like, wait, this guy, I actually respect him the most, because he's very, I don't even know how to describe him. He's very smart in the way that he maneuvers through different situations that he's in, and he's very respectful for a lot of different things. He agrees with Corlys that the king is weak, but he doesn't allow him to say that, because he is the king's brother. He can say those things about the king, but he respects the king enough to be like, yes, he is my king. You can't say anything bad about him. I can, because I'm his brother. That is why I'm saying bad stuff about him. That is why I am trying to go through this backwards way to get back his rightful heir, because he thinks he deserves it. And he's going through these different ways of kind of, in a weird way, respectfully disrespecting the king. And his relationship with Rhaenyra is also a very interesting one, because you can tell that they have this bond between each other that is very strong, yet they're kind of the two sides of the same coin. They're able to balance each other out. They're able to kind of find this mix between them, the harshness of Daemon and the respect and the kind of subtleties of Rhaenyra kind of meld together to create something that's honestly probably the perfect pair to probably be on the Iron Throne. And so I really am curious where this entire series goes. I know they're doing a bunch of time jumps, which I am kind of concerned for, because they set up episode 2 ending in a very interesting way where all these characters are kind of pitted against each other, and now they're skipping forward 3 years. So the episode on Sunday, I'm curious to see if we're going to miss a lot of that, intrigue and a lot of that kind of conversations that I want to hear between these characters, specifically between Alicent and Rhaenyra. I'm very curious to hear what this storyline is going to be going forward, and I'm worried they're going to kind of fly past it in a way that feels like we're just kind of going through the motions of the story rather than kind of sitting in it and breathing in the moments. But as of these first 2 episodes, I trust the writing and I trust this creative team behind it, and I'm very curious to see where this season goes. Alright, and the final show we're going to be talking about in this video is, of course, The Rings of Power. And if you've noticed, I'm actually in a different change of clothes. It is the next day because I have different thoughts on this after the discourse that has already happened online, which, I said in my video, if you're going to talk about these things, if you're going to criticize these things, just be respectful. So that is what I'm going to ask once again, and if you're going to bring in criticisms, bring in valid criticisms. So we're going to be talking about some of that and my overall thoughts on these first 2 episodes. So let's just kind of jump into the different categories that the show has, or the different groups of characters that they have, because in the way I see it, how they're setting things up so far, it feels like a Stranger Things type thing where we have 4 different main storylines that are all probably going to eventually converge into a main epic battle of, epic proportions by the end of this show. And getting the obvious stuff out of the way, of course, the look of this show looks amazing because they put millions and millions and millions of dollars into this thing, and so every frame of this show is beautiful. I'm not just talking about the landscape shots of the locations in these episodes, but also even the intimate conversations between different characters during the fireworks scene between Elrond and Galadriel. It was beautiful. The lighting, the framing, the depth of field, all of it was beautiful. So let's start off with Galadriel as the first character that I want to talk about, which I'll get off right off the bat. If you're calling her a Mary Sue, just get out of here. Get out of here. Or give me real reasons why you think that. Because if you think back at the Lord of the Rings movies, and you look at, say, maybe Legolas, that he comes in as a badass, and he's also an elf, so he has these skills. He's been through many battles. He's very well trained. That is how they're setting up Galadriel's character in this. And if you have criticisms that this character is very different from who was set up in the original movies and from the books, that is a valid criticism. However, I am not too into the Lord of the Rings movies. My history with them is kind of a little back and forth. I didn't watch Peter Jackson's trilogy until last year, so I've only actually seen it once all the way through, because those movies, it started off in an epic way in that opening scene, the same way that this show also starts off in, and it goes into a very character-based, kind of slow and kind of, small adventurous tale where you have all these characters journeying the way through, the entire Middle Earth. And so it is a very slow thing. It's very slowly paced, and I can get the complaints that this show is boring, because at times I was bored in some of these conversations that felt like they were just kind of meandering for a while. And if you are comparing this to the set of movies and you're comparing these characters, that is a valid criticism. That is a valid criticism to say that this maybe not be accurate to the books, but for me, I'm kind of separating myself because, in terms of Lord of the Rings movies, I have a very hard time getting myself to rewatch them because I was kind of not I don't want to say bored with them, but they're so long. It's so hard for me to get through those things. And so when you have a series where you're going week by week, and I'm able to actually sit on these different moments, and I'm actually able to digest these things on a week-to-week basis, I think a show format actually might benefit me as a viewer for what I like in these type of shows. And so for Galadriel's character, I thought she was a badass. I really liked her, her motivations and her skills that she has, and just how dedicated she is to what she believes in. And I love that moment where she's on that ship and she's able to go to this, world for the elves that they can kind of, retire to, and she decides to jump off the boat instead. While that was happening and the meteor was crashing down onto Middle Earth and all that stuff was editing between each other, that was some epic imagery, some great character moments with Galadriel, and I'm really curious to see where her character goes. The second episode, she's just kind of adrift, in the water, and she is, fighting this sea monster, which is a really fun sequence, and it has a lot of great visual aspects of that, but the first episode really did set up her motivations with her brother and her just drive to get what she wants and her drive to actually find Sauron. And that is what is most interesting to me in terms of the different plot points that have happened so far. And another reason why I wanted to re-record this section of the video is because I'm an idiot when it comes to Lord of the Rings, so if I mess anything up, please correct me in the comments down below, because I'm going to get names of things wrong, I'm going to get histories of things wrong, so very much correct me, if you will. But in my first section of the video, I didn't know what Harfoots were, and of course they're kind of like the proto-hobbits. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I like their kind of culture. They're just like, we're going to stick on our own, we don't need to worry about the the worries of the outside world in Middle Earth. We're just kind of staying on our own. And to see that, people are complaining that there are even Harfoots in this because there aren't supposed to be hobbits in this sort of time period, so they created this new like species of proto hobbits in this world. I'm all down for that because, for one, I can't imagine a Lord of the Rings show, movie, or whatever without the hobbits, because it's that type of journey with these characters that's have the sense of adventure, that want to explore the greater world, and is going to be very important to the larger parts of the story. That's something that is so ingrained in the history of Lord of the Rings and in the movies and in that Peter Jackson trilogy, that if you didn't have something like that, I feel like this show would be gravely missing that element. So I'm glad the Harfoots are here. And Nori kind of plays that character of that main hobbit who is adventurous, who wants to get out of her own world and wants to explore and do all these things. And she finds the stranger who has crash landed onto the planet or onto Middle Earth, and however that is working, I don't know. I think I called him an alien in my earlier section because I was just kind of joking around, but now I want to be serious. And I've also heard some people say that this is going to be a wizard character, which makes sense. I'm an idiot when I was first recording this section of the video. And so we don't know if he's Gandalf or if he's Saruman or if he's somebody else or if he's actually Sauron. And I think that is a theory that I think will be the most interesting for this story to go, because if he goes on to be Sauron and you see that imagery of the fire kind of looking like the eye of Sauron from the original trilogy, that would be really interesting, because now you have this Harfoot, the character who has a sense of adventure, but instead of finding Gandalf and going on this adventure to, being the hero of the story, but instead you have this Harfoot find Sauron and how that can possibly corrupt this character. That could be very interesting. That could also be very much not where they're going with it. It could be a friendly type of wizard, which that would be interesting too, but now I'm actually interested in this storyline because I know the implications of what it could mean. When it comes to Elrond's story, I didn't really connect to him too much in the first episode. I think a lot of his conversations, besides his one with Galadriel that was beautifully shot that I mentioned earlier, the stuff that was going on with him I didn't find too interesting. I don't really know what the towers were. Are the towers the things like they build these towers and that is where they forge the rings? I could be wrong. Like I said, very new to Lord of the Rings, so if you can explain that to me in the comments down below, that'd be very much appreciated. And I'll probably try to rewatch the trilogy before I finish wrapping up this series, because this is one that I definitely won't be doing week to week reviews on, because like I said, I'm not knowledgeable enough and I need to study up on my Lord of the Rings before I can do that. But just to see what these two towers or what these towers are building are actually going to be for and how it's going to lead into things in the future, that is kind of interesting. But in terms of his character, I was much more interested in him and his relationship with the dwarves in the second episode with Durin. That stuff was phenomenal. I think Durin is easily my favorite character in the show so far, because he has that sort of characteristics, that personality that exuded from all the characters in the original trilogy of movies, which I think is actually missing from this show. So in terms of negatives, I will say a lot of the personalities of these characters feel a lot more dull compared to the very lively ones in the movies. And so when you have this dwarf character, he fit that bill perfectly. I loved this dwarf world. I loved that banter that these two characters had between each other throughout the entire second episode. It was just very well done. And then you have Bronwyn and Arondir, who this is the storyline that I feel the least interested into in terms of the characters, because I think these characters, their romance and their forbidden love sort of thing could be interesting in the future. I think at this point I can see the chemistry starting there, but I'm not too interested in these characters as a whole. But their storyline with discovering the orcs, and they're the first ones to kind of deal with this imminent threat, that in the next couple episodes I think is going to be the more interesting storyline, because that's where the action is going to be, besides of course with Galadriel in this water and trying to figure out what she's doing and how she's going to get back to the main story. But in terms of the main story and how active things are happening, this is the storyline where the active action is going to happen. And so in that way, I do like the plot aspects of this area, but the characters, like I said, just don't feel as lively as the stuff in the dwarves with Elrond and Durin. And so these characters are not the most interesting in the story so far. And overall, I think that this show in general has a lot of characters, a lot of different storylines that I hope converges in a very Stranger Things-like way, in a very entertaining way, and I can see that for the future of this show. But as it stands right now, I think this is a beautifully looking show, has some interesting storylines that are much better than some of the other different storylines, and I can see the directions that this could possibly go, and I hope this show continues to surprise with the story of this thing. And if you're so connected to the lore and to the books and to how this thing kind of breaks it, I don't know exactly how it kind of breaks the continuity of Lord of the Rings, or if it is fitting into this world as perfectly as you as like super fans of the show are. But for me, at least, for a new audience member, this was enough to get me drawn into it to where I did like it. Not as much as House of the Dragon, or probably not as much as She-Hulk, because I love the MCU and I love that world. But in terms of what this show started up so far, it is easily one of of the greatest looking shows I've ever seen, and I'm very much going to continue to watch this show week by week. And so those are my thoughts on these 3 different shows. What did you guys think of She-Hulk, House of the Dragon, and of course The Rings of Power? I'm very curious to hear all you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And of course, be respectful about the discourse, and of course, be critical. That is all I ask from you guys in the comments down below. And so thanks everybody for watching this video. If you want to see more TV or movie reviews, definitely subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video. It's much appreciated. And if you want to see reviews like Andor, I will be doing that probably weekly for Andor. These shows I might wait off until, you know, the season has wrapped, and I'll talk about those shows again once all of that has happened. So thanks everybody for watching this video, and I hope to see you all in my next one.